May 1945. Somewhere in East Prussia, the war had technically ended, but no one told the prisoners. The women inside the requisitioned schoolhouse heard the generators sputter one last time. Then, with a low moan, the lights died. Darkness swallowed the corridor, leaving only the faint glow of a single candle trembling on a mess tin. Outside, the wind carried a hollow metallic rattle. Trucks, maybe tanks, maybe ghosts. Every sound meant danger now. Every silence, worse. The smell of damp uniforms and boiled barley hung in the air. Someone whispered a prayer. Another laughed too loudly, the way people do when they've run out of fear but not yet of time. These were not civilians. Most were German nurses, clerks, radio operators, and a handful of auxiliary guards captured during the Soviet push west. They'd been marched here 2 weeks ago, told it was temporary processing. Temporary had become endless. Reports say over 2 million German women were captured in the final months of the war. Many didn't even know who held them: Soviets, Poles, Czechs, sometimes all three. For us, one survivor later said the map had melted. That night it felt like the world had too. Boots scraped outside, the candle flickered, someone gasped, they're back. A low, rhythmic sound rolled closer. Engines, muted but unmistakable. Trucks moving without headlights. The door creaked as a cold gust slipped in, brushing the candle to its last inch of life. No one spoke. Even the guards inside, young Soviet recruits barely older than the prisoners, looked toward the window. The faint vibration of diesel engines rose through the floorboards. A nurse clutched a photo of her brother, missing on the Eastern Front. A stenographer pressed her hands together, not in prayer but in calculation. Could she run? Would she be shot? The light dimmed to orange, then black. Only the rumble outside remained. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and fell silent. We didn't know, one woman would later write, if it was dawn coming or them. The sound drew closer, boots in the mud now, heavy and sure, splashing through the darkness toward the broken door. The first thud hit like a heartbeat, then another. Boots, dozens of them, stomping through the rain, soaked mud outside the schoolhouse. The walls trembled under the sound. The women inside froze, eyes darting toward the door that hung crooked on its hinges. When it finally burst open, the candlelight caught glints of metal rifles, belt buckles, wet bayonets. Soviet soldiers flooded in, their silhouettes black against the lightning flash that split the night. Engines idled outside like beasts waiting to feed. The smell of diesel and sweat filled the corridor. One soldier barked an order in Russian, sharp and clipped. Another repeated it in broken German, line up, all women line up. They stumbled into the courtyard, a sea of mud, barbed wire, and flickering truck headlights. Cold wind whipped through torn coats. Someone sobbed quietly. The Soviets moved among them, not cruelly, just mechanically checking faces, counting heads. Reports from that time say nearly 80% of makeshift POW camps had no clear command structure. Many were run by local units improvising their own rules, their own punishments. To the women, that night felt leaderless, an entire war collapsing into instinct. One Russian private stopped to stare at them. His rifle was lowered, his expression unreadable. Later, one of the women remembered his words. "You look like ghosts, not enemies, not humans." Lightning flashed again, revealing the full scene: mud up to the knees, trucks lined like silent monsters, faces pale with exhaustion. A sergeant stepped forward holding a clipboard wrapped in a plastic sleeve. The sound of paper cutting through the rain was somehow louder than the thunder. He began reading names, one after another, monotone and final. No one knew what the list meant. Transfer. Execution, labor detail, hope was too fragile to hold. Some whispered their prayers in German, others mouthed words in silence, as if language itself had run out. The rain intensified. The paper in the sergeant's hand began to dissolve at the edges, but he kept reading. One nurse whispered, "Maybe if your name isn't there, you live." The sergeant's voice droned on, then a pause. He squinted at one line, Erika Weiss. A single step forward changed everything. Rain hissed on the clipboard as the sergeant called out each name, voice flat, almost bored. The sound of ink smearing on wet paper mixed with the low hum of idling engines. No one moved until a name was spoken. Then one hesitant step forward, boots sinking into mud, a silhouette separating from the line. Every few seconds, another. Each pause stretched longer than the one before it. No explanation, no translation, just names and silence. The women exchanged glances. Questions written across their faces but never spoken. Was this release? Transfer, trial, no one dared to ask. History would later reveal that thousands of German women POW were shipped east that month, many to labor camps in Siberia, some never to return. But in that moment, knowledge was a luxury no one possessed. The sergeant's pencil snapped. He didn't stop. He switched to shouting, his voice rough from fatigue. Schneider, Vogel, Weiss. Erika Weiss. The name hung in the cold air like a verdict. She froze, 23, field nurse, hair tucked under a torn cap, still wearing her medic arm band, a faded red cross now the color of rust. Her hands trembled as she stepped out of line. Mud clung to her legs like chains. Someone whispered, "Don't move." Another hissed, "If you don't, they'll shoot." She moved. A Soviet soldier pointed her toward a truck where other women already sat, silent shapes under canvas covers. The air reeked of wet burlap and exhaust. Erika climbed aboard without a word. One of the guards slammed the tailgate shut. From the line, a voice called weakly, "Where are they taking you?" Erika didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she couldn't. From the Soviet side, an officer muttered something under his breath. A translator later wrote down his words. Each name feels like a bullet, silent, certain. The engines roared to life, drowning everything else. The trucks jerked forward, headlights still off, vanishing into the fog. Those left behind stood ankle, deep in the mud, watching the darkness swallow their own futures one name at a time. When the last engine faded, only rain remained tapping softly against the ruined windows, and inside that truck, Erika's heart pounded toward whatever came next. Erika Weiss sat wedged between two women on the wooden floor of the truck, knees pulled tight to her chest. The engine vibrated through the planks, a steady growl that blurred thought into noise. Rain leaked through the torn canvas roof, dripping down the back of her neck. She didn't flinch. Her hands, once steady enough to stitch torn flesh in field hospitals, now shook uncontrollably. She was 23, a trained field nurse from Königsberg. Before capture, she'd spent months behind collapsing front lines, patching up soldiers too broken to move. Her last memory of the field hospital was chaos stretchers blocking doorways, morphine running out, shells falling so close that the dust coated her teeth. When the order came to retreat, she'd stayed, tending the wounded until Soviet tanks rolled in. That's when the uniform that once meant safety became a target. Records show that during the final retreat from the east, over 40 Zeros, German medical personnel were killed or captured. Most were women. Some volunteered to stay behind, others never had the choice. Erika was one of them. In the dim truck, she pressed her fingers to the worn fabric of her medic's bag, empty now, except for a small pair of scissors and a folded bandage. She whispered to herself, "If they see this, they'll think I'm useful." A Soviet guard riding beside the truck looked in through the canvas flap. Their eyes met. He said nothing, just stared, rain running down his helmet. She couldn't tell if it was pity or contempt. Around her, someone began to cry softly. Another woman muttered a prayer. The rhythm of the truck wheels became hypnotic, a lullaby for the condemned. Erika's head drooped, half asleep, half in dread. Through a tear in the canvas, she caught flashes of ruined villages, burned rafters, twisted bicycles, the skeletal remains of homes. Civilians stood on doorsteps watching the convoy pass. Their faces didn't show anger anymore, just emptiness. They looked at us with hatred, she thought, and pity. As dawn began to pale the horizon, the convoy slowed. The trucks rolled to a stop beside a shattered railway junction. Steam hissed from a nearby locomotive. A new command echoed through the air. Out, all of you. The truck jolted to a stop beside a broken railway line. Steam hissed from an idle locomotive, ghostly in the grey dawn. The women were ordered out one by one, stumbling into ankle-deep mud. The air was sharp with the smell of coal and wet ash. Around them stretched a wasteland of collapsed homes and scorched barns. The road was littered with rusted helmets, shattered glass, and silence. Soviet guards barked directions, herding the prisoners toward the tracks. Erica kept her head down, clutching her medic's satchel, now just a symbol of hope. Behind her, someone whispered, "Where are they taking us?" Another voice answered, flat and tired, "East, always east." The convoy moved again, this time on foot. They trudged through the ruins of once familiar towns, past villagers who watched with unreadable faces. Some spat, others just stared. In one yard, a little boy tossed a rock and missed. His mother pulled him back wordlessly. According to post-war records, over 15 million Germans were displaced across Eastern Europe in 1945. Soldiers, civilians, nurses, even children. The border between prisoner and refugee had vanished. Everyone was just running from something bigger than war. The column passed a burned church. Its bell lay cracked in the mud, half buried, like it had tried to ring one last time and failed. A Soviet truck rolled by, spraying mud across the line of captives. No one reacted. Fatigue had eaten their pride. Erica's boots rubbed blisters raw. The woman beside her, a typist named Marta, fell behind. A guard shouted. Erica reached out to help her. The soldier hesitated, then waved them both forward. Even in command, he looked hollow. The war had taken everything from both sides. They looked at us, Erica thought, with hatred and pity. At dusk, the convoy reached a makeshift rail junction, splintered sleepers, rusted rails leading into a fog that seemed endless. A cluster of boxcars waited, doors open like black mouths. Guards signaled the women forward. Someone murmured, "Is this the end?" Erica looked at the train, its iron sides gleaming wet under fading light. She didn't answer. Her legs moved anyway. The sound of the first door slamming shut echoed like a gunshot. The steel door slammed behind them with a hollow, final echo. Darkness swallowed the space. The air inside was thick with damp wood, rust, and fear. Erica blinked, her eyes adjusting to the faint slit of light slicing through the boards. The floor shuddered beneath her as the locomotive coughed to life. A baby whimpered somewhere in the dark. No seats, no straw, just bodies pressed together, 30 women, shoulder to shoulder, trying not to collapse. Every breath came back a steam. When someone fainted, there was nowhere to lay her down. The metal walls amplified every noise, the hiss of wheels, the clang of couplings, the muffled sobs of exhaustion. Outside, the world blurred into motion. Fields, forests, ruins, no one could see them, but they could feel the direction, east. Always east. Reports later showed that during 1945-46, 1 in 10 POW died during transport, mostly from cold, dehydration, or suffocation. The women didn't know the odds, only that the air was thinning fast. Erica tore a strip from her skirt, dipped it in the condensation running down the wall, and pressed it to Marta's cracked lips. "Drink," she whispered. The fabric came away black with soot. At some point, someone began humming, a lullaby barely audible. It spread like a fragile thread through the dark until a guard banged on the roof with his rifle butt. Silence fell again. The train slowed for hours, then jerked forward again. Time lost meaning. Hunger turned into a steady ache. Erica could no longer feel her feet. A sharp light suddenly cut through the cracks, daylight. The engine groaned to a stop. Voices shouted outside in Russian. The door creaked open, flooding the car with blinding white. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a command, "Out, all out." The women stumbled into snow. The air burned their lungs with cold. A sign nearby, barely legible through frost, read Kurgan. A new place, a new kind of silence. From behind her, a Soviet officer muttered, "We were not prepared for this many." Erica turned toward the camp gates, barbed wire stretching into endless whiteness. The journey had ended, but the captivity had just begun. The wind at Kurgan cut through bone. The convoy emptied into a clearing ringed by barbed wire and skeletal birch trees. The sky looked like tin, flat and colorless. Erica stood shivering among hundreds of new arrivals, each face grey with frost and disbelief. In front of them rose a cluster of huts, rough planks, tar, paper roofs, smoke curling weakly from rusted chimneys. A Soviet officer shouted the camp rules through a megaphone: no talking after dark, no fires without permission. No escape, no translation was offered, the meaning was obvious. Guards herded the women toward registration tables. A clerk dipped a pen into ink that had frozen solid, scratching names onto forms anyway. Kurgan was one of dozens of labor camps scattered across the Urals, part of a network that spanned over 5 million square miles of Soviet territory. Here, prisoners cut timber, hauled coal, or built rail lines no one would ever ride. Survival depended less on strength than luck, and a bit of mercy from the guards. Erica's turn came. The clerk glanced up, noticed her medic badge, and wrote a single word beside her name: Sanitarka, nurse. She was handed a wool blanket that smelled of diesel and smoke, and ordered toward the infirmary hut. The path was lined with footprints already filling with snow. She passed rows of men in striped uniforms digging trenches, their faces hollow as ash. One looked up and muttered something she couldn't catch. Later she'd learn it meant another ghost. Inside the infirmary, warmth hit like a shock. A single stove glowed red, surrounded by stretchers and buckets of melted snow. A Soviet orderly, young and tired, pointed to a cot. "Work here," he said. "No questions." That night, Erica stitched a cut on a Russian guard's hand using thread pulled from her own uniform. He watched her in silence. When she tied the final knot, he nodded once. Spasibo. He murmured, "Thank you." They didn't scream. She'd recall later. They just stared. Outside, floodlights swept the snowfield. Somewhere, a whistle blew shift change. The guards rotated, the prisoners didn't. Through the cracks in the hut, Erica saw the next transport arriving. More women, more ghosts, more names for the ledger. The infirmary at Kurgan smelled of frost, iodine, and something metallic that never left. Erica woke before dawn to the sound of coughing. Deep, hollow, endless. She had been assigned to care for both prisoners and guards, a decision born not of mercy but necessity. Infection spread faster than politics. Her supplies were a box of dull needles, a spool of wire for stitches, and a handful of Red Cross ampoules that had somehow found their way through the Soviet supply maze. According to lease records, small quantities of medical kits trickled into Soviet camps by 1946, a detail almost no one outside the archives remembers. On her first morning, a Russian guard limped in, frost, bite gnawing at his toes. He looked at her with wary defiance. She motioned for him to sit, unwrapped the cloth, and began trimming away blackened flesh. He hissed but didn't pull back. When she finished, she bound his foot with strips from her own undershirt. He stared at her, uncertain. "Why help?" he asked in broken German. Erica didn't answer. She just said, "Because I can." The room fell quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Humanity felt dangerous here, an act of rebellion. Later that week, more patients came. A Polish woman with pneumonia, a German clerk with frostbite, a Soviet sentry whose hand had been crushed by a gate. Erica worked on all of them the same way, efficient, detached, but alive in her purpose. For a few hours each day, she wasn't a prisoner or a number. She was a nurse again. A note of irony clung to every heartbeat. She was healing the same army that had burned her hometown. Yet when the Russian guard returned the next day, he left a piece of bread on the cot. He didn't say a word. Another orderly whispered, "She saved me," a German. Why? Snow kept falling, muffling the camp into a world without edges. At night, Erica listened to the distant rumble of trains' arrivals or departures. No one knew. Then one morning, a messenger arrived at the gate with a single envelope stamped in red. Release order, repatriation. Rumors spread like fire through the huts. Hope, fragile but burning, returned. The letter arrived with the morning frost, a plain envelope, its seal stamped red with the Soviet hammer and sickle. The guards carried it like a holy relic, every movement deliberate. Rumor spread faster than breath, repatriation. Release, the word alone was electric. For months the camp had spoken only in numbers, rations, shifts, deaths. Now there was a word that sounded almost human again. The women gathered near the mess hall, their eyes drawn to the officer unfolding the letter. His gloves cracked as he gripped the paper, reading through the list with slow, unfeeling rhythm. Names echoed across the snow. Each one landed like a heartbeat or a bullet. Richter, Meyer, Schneider, the crowd murmured, hands clasped, lips moved in silent prayers. Erika stood apart near the infirmary door, the taste of iron in her mouth. She wasn't sure she wanted to listen. Reports show that by 1949, nearly 250 German POW were released from Soviet custody, many after years of forced labor. But those numbers meant nothing here. All that mattered was the next name. The officer's voice droned on. Then a pause, his eyes scanning the page again. No more, he said finally, folding the list. The sound of paper against leather gloves felt louder than the wind. A woman near Erika collapsed to her knees, sobbing from relief. Another screamed, realizing her name hadn't been called. Hope had turned just as quickly to despair. Erika pressed her palms against her coat. Her name wasn't there. It hadn't even been close. Later, at roll call, the lucky ones were escorted out, those few who had been cleared for return. The rest watched through the wire as the group boarded trucks, some crying, some smiling through disbelief. The engines roared to life, spitting black smoke that hung like ink against the white sky. Marta whispered, maybe next list. Erika didn't answer. She just stared at the red stamp on the officer's sleeve. Realizing hope was dangerous here, it made you weak, made you visible. When night fell, the snow began again, soft and unending. The camp lights flickered, and somewhere a train whistle blew far off to the west. Erika whispered to herself, not this time. Winter, 1948. The world beyond the wire had rebuilt itself, but here, time still moved in circles. Snow, thaw, mud, hunger, snow again. The war had ended 3 years ago, yet for Erika and hundreds like her, peace was just another word that never arrived. The rations had shrunk to a ladle of cabbage broth and a slice of black bread. Erika learned to trade small things for survival, a button for salt, a thread of morphine for a crust of bread. One night she sold her last possession, her mother's locket, to a Soviet clerk for a few boiled potatoes. When she handed it over, she didn't even open it one last time. The past had become too heavy to look at. The infirmary had grown quieter. Disease took fewer now. The ones left were the tough ones, the ones who had learned how to make life out of nothing. Soviet records show mortality in camps like Kurgan dropped below 5% by 1948, partly due to better rations and supply routes. But statistics never captured the hollow eyes of those who'd already lost everything. At night, Erika sat by the stove, listening to the fire hiss. The guard she once treated for frost might sometimes brought her extra rags or a heel of bread. No words passed between them anymore. They didn't need to. Both were surviving systems larger than themselves. One evening, snow began falling again, thick, silent, endless. The wind crept through the cracks, scattering ash across the floor. Marta leaned close and whispered, "When this ends, will they even remember us?" Erika looked at her hands, the skin cracked and grey. "Maybe that's the mercy," she said. Even the guards looked different now. Less anger, more exhaustion. One Russian corporal, watching the women file back from work detail, muttered to himself, "Even enemies learn mercy when the cold wins." By spring, rumors spread through the camp. Trains were coming, not for arrivals, but for closures. The Soviets were dismantling smaller camps, consolidating survivors. The whisper passed from hut to hut. "They're sending us home." The snow melted, revealing old footprints beneath. The same paths they had walked since the first day. This time, though, the footprints pointed west. A gate creaked open. Orders barked. They were marching again. The gates of Kurgan groaned open one last time. A rusted padlock clanged against the post, and the sound echoed like a gunshot across the snowfield. The guards didn't line up with rifles this time. They just pointed west. "Go," one said in flat Russian. Home, no trucks, no trains, just a column of women walking. Coats torn, boots stitched with wire, faces carved by wind. The world outside the fence felt too wide, too bright. Some stumbled at first, like animals released from cages. Others hesitated, glancing back at the camp that had been both prison and shelter. They walked for days, following the frozen road past villages where people barely looked up. No one cheered, no one offered food. The war had eaten empathy whole. The women marched through ghost towns where chimneys still stood but roofs had collapsed, through forests stripped bare for firewood, through silence that felt older than the war itself. Erica counted her steps in her head as if numbers could keep her sane. 10,000, 15, 20. She no longer felt her feet, only the rhythm of movement. Marta limped beside her, coughing blood into the snow. When she finally fell, Erica tried to lift her, but the others pulled her forward. "You can't," one whispered. "You'll both die. By Soviet archive estimates, 1 million German POW died in custody, their graves scattered from Ukraine to Siberia. No one would mark where Marta fell. The snow would cover her by morning. The column thinned as days bled into weeks. Those who couldn't walk were left behind. Those who could kept moving, driven by something beyond will. Maybe habit, maybe hope. When they crossed the border into Poland, the guards handed them small slips of paper, discharged non-combatant. The war had finally decided to forget them. At the edge of a ruined village, a faded wooden sign appeared, the first German word Erica had seen in years, "Grenz, a border." The women stopped. No one spoke. Some knelt, touching the frozen ground as if it might recognize them. "We walked out," one survivor later wrote, but never truly left. Erica stared at the sign until her eyes blurred. Then she stepped forward into the ruins of her homeland. The border felt like a graveyard. The wooden post that read Grenz was cracked half, buried in snow, its letters fading into rot. Beyond it stretched a landscape of rubble and chimneys, what had once been East Prussia, now just a wound on the map. Erica stepped across the invisible line, her boots sinking into ash, colored slush. For a moment she waited to feel something. Relief, victory, anything. Nothing came. She walked for 2 days before reaching a village she almost recognized. Roofs were caved in, windows stuffed with paper, walls scorched black. A group of children watched her from a doorway, their faces sharp with hunger and mistrust. One called out, "Are you Russian?" She shook her head. The child turned away. At the edge of town, she found the ruins of a small house, her family's old home. The door hung crooked, half torn off. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and dust. She sat on the floor and traced her fingers over the wall where a picture frame had once hung. Nothing was left. Her parents were gone. Her brother never came back from the front. In Post, or Germany, 35% of returning female POW were shunned or ostracized, labeled as collaborators or tainted. By Soviet captivity, for Erica, that truth arrived quietly. When she ventured into the market the next morning, whispers followed her. She came from the east. Someone muttered, "Soviet woman." She tried to trade a spoon for bread, but the shopkeeper looked away. "No ration card," he said. She understood. Her war was over, but her punishment wasn't. That night she found shelter in a bombed-out schoolhouse, the same kind of place where her captivity had begun. The irony stung. Through the cracked window the moonlight hit her face, and for the first time in years she saw herself clearly. Thinner, older, her eyes no longer afraid, just tired. "They thought we'd been broken." She murmured, voice barely above breath, "Maybe we had." She closed her eyes, trying to remember something good, her brother's laugh, her mother's kitchen, but the only sound she could summon was the distant echo of that night, when the lights went out and the trucks arrived. The memory pulled her backward, toward the moment it all began, May 8th, 1945, the night the world split in half. The Reich had fallen, radios across Europe crackled with the word surrender, and somewhere in East Prussia, a field nurse named Erika Weiss was still kneeling beside a dying soldier, her hand covered in blood and dust. Outside, artillery had gone silent. Inside, the quiet was worse. The lamps flickered under a low ceiling of smoke. Every heartbeat felt borrowed. She tied the last bandage, pressed her hand over the soldier's chest, no movement. The war had ended mid-breath. When she stood, her knees almost buckled. From outside came a sound she would never forget, the distant, rhythmic thrum of engines. Soviet engines, closer each minute. The other nurses looked at her, waiting for orders that wouldn't come. The officer in charge had fled hours ago, leaving only a handwritten note, "Hold until relieved." Relief was coming, just not the kind anyone imagined. Erika stepped into the corridor. The floor was slick with water, and morphine ampoules crushed under boots. She reached the window, pushed the blackout curtain aside and froze. The night sky pulsed red as Soviet flares rose above the tree line. For a second, the light turned the snow pink, almost beautiful. Then it faded to black again. In that brief glow, she saw them, silhouettes advancing, slow, methodical, rifles slung forward. The Red Army had arrived. She turned back to the others. "We stay calm," she whispered, "no sudden moves." But calm was impossible now. A shell exploded somewhere behind the hospital, shaking the walls. Dust rained from the rafters. A few women ran to the basement, others froze where they stood. Erika didn't move. She could already hear the trucks pulling up outside, engines cutting, boots splashing through mud. In the doorway, a Soviet soldier appeared, young, exhausted, his face unreadable. He lifted his hand, palm out. "Konitz," he said softly, "the end." The candle on the table flickered. That was her last night as a free woman, the moment before captivity, before the lists, before the train, before Kurgan. History would remember that night for victory. Erika would remember it for silence. For her, that night never ended.